It was a chilly autumn morning, the kind that carries a quiet stillness before the day truly begins. People hurried through the streets, clutching their coats tight against the crisp wind. Among them was David Miller, a man in his late 50s, whose face bore the calmness of a life well lived, or so it appeared to the outside world. To his neighbors, David was just another ordinary man. A quiet, kind-hearted husband. A loving father. A man who had been married to the same woman, Helen, for nearly 30 years. Their relationship was the kind most people respected, solid, steady, and seemingly filled with mutual love and understanding. But what David didn't know was that his entire world was about to shatter in the most unthinkable way. It started with an old photo album, tucked away in a box that hadn't been touched in years. David found it while cleaning out the attic, searching for old Halloween decorations. The dust-covered album was filled with memories, pictures from their wedding day, vacations, birthdays, quiet Sunday mornings. He smiled at the snapshots of their younger years, but as he flipped through the pages, something caught his eye. A small, crumpled envelope hidden between 2 pages. Inside it was a letter, dated back almost 30 years ago. And what it said would pull the floor out from under everything he thought he knew about his wife. The words were brief, almost cryptic. But one line burned itself into his memory. "I never told you the truth, because I was afraid you'd leave me before we ever had a chance to begin." That one sentence led David down a path of questions, and the more he searched, the more pieces of the puzzle began falling into place, pieces he had never thought to look for before. He started to recall little things, small inconsistencies, moments that hadn't made sense at the time but now felt like silent warnings. The way Helen had always avoided doctors, even when she was sick. Her quiet discomfort around certain topics. Her insistence that some things were just better left in the past. David couldn't let it go. Something in him needed to know. He began digging, quietly, carefully, not wanting to believe there was anything to worry about. But the more he found, the more he realized that Helen had been hiding a truth bigger than he could have imagined. And then, the truth came out. Not from her lips, but from a long-lost medical file he wasn't supposed to find. The reality hit him like a storm. The woman he had shared his life with, loved, trusted, built a family with, was not who she claimed to be. Helen had been born biologically male and transitioned long before they met. She never told him. And in that moment, when truth clashed with trust, when love collided with betrayal, David's world came undone. But this isn't just a story about secrets and shock. Because across the country, on that very same day, a completely different story was unfolding. One that started in a city bus on the other side of town. 17-year-old Marcus, a black high school senior, was riding home after a long day of classes and football practice. The bus was crowded. People were tired. Nobody was in the mood for small talk. But when a pregnant white woman stepped onto the bus, clearly struggling to stay on her feet, Marcus didn't hesitate. He stood up, smiled gently, and offered her his seat. She thanked him with a nod, sat down quietly, and for a while, there was nothing special about the moment. But just before she got off at her stop, she turned to him and handed him a folded piece of paper. No explanation. Just a soft smile and a quiet thank you. Curious, Marcus waited until she left and then opened the note. What was written inside would change the direction of his life forever. 2 lives. 2 completely different stories. One unraveling with a devastating secret decades in the making, the other just beginning with a simple act of kindness. And yet, both would raise the same haunting question. How well do we really know the people around us? What happens next would pull both of these lives into stories far bigger than themselves, filled with pain, truth, redemption, and the weight of choices made in silence. But the full story is only just beginning. David couldn't sleep that night. He sat at the edge of his bed in the dim glow of a bedside lamp, the letter trembling in his hand. Helen was asleep beside him, unaware that the truth she had buried so long ago was now staring her husband in the face. The words kept echoing in his mind, "I never told you the truth, because I was afraid you'd leave me." Over and over. It wasn't just the shock of the revelation, it was the weight of 3 decades of life built on something he now questioned entirely. Their wedding, their anniversaries, the laughter, the arguments, the way she looked at him across the dinner table. Was it all real? Or had she just been playing a role? He looked at her as she slept, her breathing soft and steady, completely at peace. And for a brief moment, a memory rushed back of their honeymoon by the lake, her laughter as she dipped her toes in the water, how she rested her head on his shoulder as they watched the sun go down. It had felt real then. It had been real, hadn't it? But now, doubt was eating away at every memory. Who was Helen, really? How had she kept something so huge from him for all these years? And more importantly, why hadn't he ever seen it? The next morning, things were different. David watched her more closely, studying her face as she sipped her coffee, the way she avoided eye contact when talking about the past. He noticed how carefully she changed the subject whenever he brought up old times, how she seemed to protect certain memories like glass, fragile, too dangerous to touch. He didn't say anything, not yet. He wasn't sure if he was ready to hear the answers. He wasn't even sure what questions to ask. But inside him, a storm was beginning to build. And with every hour that passed, the silence between them grew heavier. Across town, Marcus was having a different kind of day. After stepping off the bus, he walked home with the note still folded in his pocket, unopened. His house was quiet, his mom working a double shift, his little sister asleep in front of the TV. He dropped his backpack by the couch and finally pulled out the note, flattening it on the kitchen table. The handwriting was neat, delicate. Almost like it had been written slowly, with care. "Dear young man," it began. "You don't know me, and I may never see you again. But I want you to know that what you did today mattered. I've been through something incredibly difficult recently. I've lost a lot, my job, my home, my support system. I'm carrying this child alone. And lately, I've been wondering if I can even keep going. But today, when you stood up and gave me your seat, you reminded me that kindness still exists in this world. That there's still hope. Thank you. A stranger." Marcus read the note twice. 3 times. He didn't know what to feel. It was just a seat. That's all he'd done. But now, reading her words, he realized something bigger. Sometimes the smallest actions could reach into the deepest places in someone's life. And he had no idea his simple gesture had touched someone who was struggling that much. Still, there was something about the note that stayed with him. A heaviness in the tone. Like she hadn't just been thanking him, but maybe saying goodbye. That thought stuck in his chest like a cold stone. Who was she? Where had she gone? Was she okay? The questions turned in his mind all night, and he made a decision. He wanted to find her. Not to bother her. Not to be a hero. Just to make sure she was all right. The next day, Marcus asked the bus driver about her. But the driver barely remembered. Said she was just one of dozens of people who got on and off every day. No name. No number. Nothing. Meanwhile, back at David's home, things were getting colder between him and Helen. He'd started pulling away, asking fewer questions but saying even less. She could feel it, but she didn't press. Part of her had always known this moment might come, that the past doesn't stay buried forever. She sat in the living room that evening, flipping through an old recipe book, her fingers trembling slightly. The TV was on, but she wasn't watching. Her eyes kept drifting to the family photo on the mantelpiece. David, her, their daughter Emily, taken 15 years ago at a beach. They'd looked so happy. They were happy. And yet, here it was, all crumbling under the weight of one truth she had never been brave enough to share. She thought back to the years before David. The surgeries. The decisions. The pain of hiding, the fear of being found out. She remembered the loneliness. How David had been the first man who made her feel seen, not as someone who had to explain herself, but as someone worthy of love. But she had made a choice back then. She chose to never tell him. And that choice had followed her like a shadow every day since. The silence in the house deepened. David stayed in the garage more, working on an old car he'd barely touched in years. Not to fix it, but because he needed space. He needed to breathe. And yet, the question still lingered in his mind, louder now. If she loved him, truly loved him, how could she lie for so long? Back in Marcus's world, the note had changed something inside him. He started paying more attention on the bus. He watched people more closely. He began noticing things he hadn't before: the tired eyes of a mother with 2 kids, the trembling hands of an older man counting coins for fare, the blank stares of teenagers just trying to get through the day. The world looked different now. Or maybe, he was different. One afternoon, he saw a familiar coat on a passenger who got off at the same stop the pregnant woman had. His heart raced. Could it be her? He followed her at a distance, down a quiet side street, past an old laundromat. But when she turned around, it wasn't her. Just a stranger. Disappointed, Marcus turned back. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he had to keep looking. Something inside him wouldn't let go. In a city filled with secrets and quiet kindness, 2 people were searching. One for answers about the past, the other for a stranger who reminded him of what really matters. And neither of them knew that their stories were about to intersect in the most unexpected way. The truth was still hidden. But not for long. David's mind was a maze of confusion and anger. Every day felt heavier than the last. He couldn't look at Helen without feeling a cold, unfamiliar distance between them. She could tell something was wrong, but every time she tried to bridge the gap, David pulled away further. She kept telling herself it was just a phase, a rough patch they would work through. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. It wasn't just a disagreement about the dishes or an offhand comment. It was something bigger, something deeper. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, and no matter how much they loved each other, some things can never be taken back. Helen had always been terrified of this day. The day David would find out who she really was. When they first met, she had kept it locked away, convinced that the love between them was pure enough to withstand the truth. She'd wanted to believe that the life they built together, everything they had, was enough to protect her secret. But she couldn't keep living in fear forever. The weight of the lie had grown too much for her to bear, and now it was unraveling, piece by piece. It wasn't just about the lie, though. It was about the life she had built. What would happen to them? To their daughter, Emily? Would David still love her, or would he see her as a monster? The thought of him rejecting her was unbearable. And yet, the silence between them was growing louder each day. She couldn't avoid it anymore. She needed to tell him. But how? Meanwhile, Marcus's quest had become an obsession. Every day, he walked the streets looking for her, the woman from the bus, hoping he would see her face again. He couldn't explain why it mattered so much to him. He had no connection to her beyond a simple gesture, one small act of kindness, but something about her story had stayed with him. He couldn't shake the image of the note, the weight of her words. He kept imagining what it would be like for her, going through life alone with no one to help her, carrying a child while facing the world's judgment. It had been more than just a thank you, it felt like a cry for help. His search took him to places he didn't expect to go: rundown shelters, busy homeless shelters, places where people came for a second chance or just a meal. The woman's face never materialized in any of the crowds. The only thing he could cling to was the memory of her tired eyes, the look of someone who had been through so much. Each time he asked around, people just looked at him like he was crazy, telling him to forget about her. "She's gone, man," one woman told him. "People come and go all the time." But Marcus couldn't let it go. He couldn't stop searching. The more he looked for answers, the more he realized how little he understood about the world around him. It wasn't just the pregnant woman he was looking for, it was something deeper. He was looking for meaning. For something bigger than his everyday life, something that would make the world seem less empty. Days passed in a haze for both David and Marcus, their separate lives spiraling in different directions, bound by invisible threads they didn't yet know connected them. David's restlessness grew. His stomach churned with anxiety every time he looked at Helen. He started going for long walks in the early morning, trying to clear his head. But each time, his thoughts drifted back to the letter, to the shocking truth it contained. He had never suspected anything, never even thought to question her. The life they shared had been flawless, at least to him. What did that mean now? His co-workers at the auto repair shop had noticed the change in him. They teased him about looking tired and stressed, but no one understood. No one could understand. The man he was supposed to trust most had kept the most significant part of herself hidden from him for so long. What had he missed? What had been real? One evening, after a particularly long day, David returned home to find Helen sitting at the kitchen table, her hands folded neatly in front of her. The air between them was thick, charged. She had been waiting for him to come home, waiting for the right moment. And in that moment, something in David snapped. He couldn't take it anymore. He needed answers. He had to know. "Why didn't you tell me?" The words came out more harshly than he intended, and Helen flinched, but she didn't look away. She had been expecting this, but that didn't make it any easier. "I was scared," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I thought if I told you, you'd leave me. I thought you'd never look at me the same again." David ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "How could you hide something like this from me, Helen? 30 years. 30 years, and you never told me the truth." His voice was raw now, and it felt like everything in the room had collapsed in on them. She shook her head, her eyes filled with regret. "I never wanted to lie to you. I loved you, David. I still love you. But I had to protect myself. I didn't know how to tell you. And I couldn't bear losing you." Her voice trembled as she spoke the words she had kept buried for so long. David felt something cold settle in his chest. He wanted to reach out to her, to hold her and tell her it would be okay. But something inside him stopped him. He couldn't just forgive her without understanding why she did it. He needed time to process, to figure out if he could live with the truth. But the silence between them was deafening. Helen's heart ached. She had never meant to hurt him. But now, as the weight of the secret finally came crashing down, she realized how much she had truly risked. Was there love enough to survive this? Or had she shattered everything with one lie? And in another part of the city, Marcus continued his search. His quest for the woman had led him into the darker corners of the city, places that had swallowed people whole. He had heard rumors, whispers of someone who might know her, but each lead turned cold. It felt like chasing shadows. Yet, he couldn't stop. Every step, every hour spent searching, was another thread pulling him toward something he wasn't sure he even understood yet. And deep down, Marcus knew that the woman he was searching for wasn't just any stranger. She was someone with a story. A story that, just like his own, was waiting to be uncovered. Two people, unknowingly connected. Both haunted by their secrets. Both searching for answers that might destroy them or set them free. But neither knew that soon, their paths would cross in a way they could never imagine. The days turned colder, both outside and inside the walls of David and Helen's home. They moved around each other like strangers now, polite, quiet, careful not to touch on anything real. The tension hung thick in the air. David tried to distract himself with work, chores, anything that kept him from thinking too much. But it was impossible to silence the storm that raged in his chest. Every time he looked at Helen, he remembered the version of her he thought he knew. And now, that image was crumbling. Helen, on the other hand, lived with the fear that each moment could be their last as a couple. She caught herself glancing at the clock, listening for the sound of David's truck pulling into the driveway, wondering if he'd come home at all. She replayed every conversation in her head, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. She wanted to believe love could survive something like this. But love built on silence wasn't love, it was survival. Their daughter, Emily, had started to notice the cracks. She came by for dinner one night, and the moment she walked in, she could feel it. The forced smiles. The hollow laughs. Something was off, but neither of her parents offered an explanation. They were pretending everything was fine, but the space between them was loud enough to shake the room. Emily didn't ask questions yet. But she would. And Helen knew that when she did, the truth would spill out whether they were ready or not. Meanwhile, across the city, Marcus found himself standing outside an old church shelter. He'd been walking for hours, chasing another dead-end lead. His feet ached, and part of him was ready to give up. But something told him to keep going. He stepped inside, the warm air wrapping around him, offering a moment of comfort. Volunteers moved around serving meals, and the faint sound of a choir hummed from a nearby room. He approached a woman at the front desk, showed her the note. "I'm looking for someone. She's pregnant. Wears a tan coat. She gave me this on the bus a few weeks ago." The woman looked at the paper, her eyes softening. She didn't say much, just handed the note back and said, "She's been here before. But not recently. We're worried about her too." Marcus's heart sank. He'd gotten closer, but still no answers. Still no face. Just more mystery. He stepped outside again, the sky growing darker. Streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows on the pavement. He had no name. No address. Just a gut feeling that this story wasn't over. Back in David's world, things were reaching a breaking point. He was sitting alone in the garage, staring at an old photo album he found buried in a storage box. The images inside were full of smiles, birthdays, holidays, a lifetime of shared memories. He turned the pages slowly, his eyes landing on a photo of their wedding day. Helen looked radiant. He looked proud. But now he couldn't stop thinking, was that version of Helen already hiding the truth back then? And if she was, had he ever really known her at all? His hand trembled as he closed the album. His chest felt tight, and a part of him hated himself for still caring. For still feeling love despite the betrayal. But how could he turn it off? 30 years with someone didn't just vanish. Even if the truth shattered everything, the past still held weight. Then came the letter. A plain white envelope slipped under their front door. No return address. Just his name written on the front. David picked it up cautiously, unfolded the paper inside. The handwriting was different from Helen's. Messier. Rushed. "David, you don't know me, but I know your wife. I know her before she was Helen. There's more you don't know. If you want the truth, meet me. Tomorrow night. Alone. Don't tell her." There was an address scribbled at the bottom. A part of the city David hadn't been to in years. His heart pounded. Was this some kind of prank? Or worse, someone trying to stir the pot? But curiosity had already sunk its claws in him. And he couldn't ignore it. Helen noticed the change in him the next day. He seemed quieter, more distant. She knew something was coming, something that would shift the fragile balance they'd been trying to hold. She wanted to ask, to pull the truth out of him, but she was afraid. That night, as David left the house, Helen stood by the window, watching him drive away. Her gut told her he wasn't just going for a drive. She felt it. Something was about to happen. Across the city, Marcus sat on the edge of a park bench, scrolling through his phone, reading forums and community boards. He had posted a message about the woman he was looking for, describing her, the coat, the note. Someone had replied earlier that day, saying a woman matching that description had been seen near an abandoned apartment building on 8th Street. The place was run down, half the windows boarded, graffiti covering the walls. But he went anyway. Because something inside him refused to quit. He arrived just as the sun dipped behind the buildings, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. The air was still, unnervingly quiet. He approached the door, which hung slightly open. Inside, the smell of mildew and dust filled the air. Old newspapers covered the floor, and broken furniture lay scattered around. He walked slowly, calling out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" A soft voice responded from the shadows. "Who's there?" He froze. The voice, it sounded familiar. He stepped closer. And there she was. The woman from the bus. Tired, pale, her coat wrapped tightly around her, a small backpack at her side. Their eyes met, and for a second, the world paused. "You found me," she whispered. Marcus didn't know what to say. His heart was beating so fast, he could barely speak. "I didn't want to be found," she said quietly. "But thank you for coming." And just like that, their stories, separate, distant, spinning in different corners of the city, were now tangled in a moment that neither of them fully understood. David, at that same time, pulled into a dark alley behind the address from the letter. The streetlights flickered overhead. He stepped out of the truck, clutching the envelope in one hand, a mix of fear and anger boiling inside him. A man stepped from the shadows. Tall. Grey coat. Worn face. "You're David?" David nodded. "Who are you?" "I'm someone who knew her before you did. And I think it's time you heard the full truth." The man took a deep breath, his eyes filled with something David couldn't place, maybe guilt. Maybe regret. And just before he could speak, A loud sound echoed from the distance, somewhere nearby. Like glass breaking. David's eyes snapped in that direction. The man paused. What was that? David asked. I don't know, the man whispered. But whatever it is, it's part of the story too. And that's when David realized this wasn't just about Helen anymore. This was bigger, older, and much darker than he had ever imagined. David took a cautious step back, eyes narrowing as the man shifted his weight. Something didn't feel right. The man had barely said 2 full sentences, yet David could already sense this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. The way he looked at him, like he knew too much, like he'd been holding on to something for years, set every alarm ringing in David's head. Who are you, really? David asked again, this time more firmly. The man hesitated. Then he finally spoke. My name is Carl. I knew Helen before she was Helen. Back when we both lived in a group home. She wasn't hiding from you, David. She was hiding from someone else. David's breath caught in his chest. Carl continued, voice low, eyes darting to the shadows. There was a man. Dangerous. Controlling. Helen, or, back then, he went by a different name. He got away. Started over. Changed everything. But that man, he never stopped looking. David's head spun. This wasn't what he expected. It wasn't just about the secret Helen had kept from him, there was another layer to this. Another man. A predator. A threat that had been lurking beneath the surface all these years. Carl pulled something from his coat, a folded newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. He handed it to David. David unfolded it slowly. His eyes locked on the headline, Local Teen Escapes Abusive Foster Father, Disappears Without a Trace. The grainy black and white photo showed a much younger version of Helen, or rather, the person she used to be. The resemblance was clear, even after all these years. And beneath it all, David could feel the world shifting. She ran because she had no choice, Carl said. She didn't lie to you because she didn't love you. She lied because she thought she'd finally found safety. David's throat tightened. It didn't make the betrayal feel any lighter, but now it came wrapped in tragedy instead of deception. Before he could ask more, Carl's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and suddenly went pale. She's in danger, he muttered. They found her. Who? David asked sharply. Carl didn't answer. He turned and started walking quickly toward the alley's exit. We have to move. Now. Meanwhile, across the city, Marcus was sitting with the pregnant woman in the abandoned apartment. The light was dim, but her eyes were clear now, more focused. She clutched her stomach, wincing in pain, and Marcus stepped closer. Are you okay? She nodded, barely. Just some cramps. It comes and goes. He looked around the broken room. This place isn't safe. You need to be somewhere better. She hesitated, then whispered, they're looking for me. If they find me again, I don't know what they'll do. Who's looking for you? She looked up at him with tired, scared eyes. My baby's father. He's not who you think he is. He owns people. He controls everything. I ran when I found out what he was doing to others like me. Marcus felt the weight of her words. He'd thought he was just helping someone who'd hit a rough patch. But now he was staring into a story darker than he'd imagined, one that involved abuse, trafficking, and a woman who'd risked everything to escape. I'm not going to let them find you, he said softly. You're safe with me. But even as he said it, he heard the sound. A car engine. Slowly rolling to a stop outside the building. The woman's body tensed. That's them. Marcus moved fast, pulling her toward the back of the building. There had to be another way out. He didn't have a plan, just instinct. They moved through the dark hallways, her footsteps light but unsteady. Downstairs, the front door creaked open. Heavy boots stepped inside. 2 stories were now hurtling toward a collision. David, chasing answers and revelations he never imagined. Marcus, protecting a stranger whose truth could expose something much bigger than any one person. Back in the truck, Carl was making frantic calls. She's not supposed to be alone, he muttered. She knows better than this. Then he looked at David, eyes sharp. You want the truth? You want to know who Helen really is? Then we have to find her first. Because her story and this girl's, Marcus's girl, they're connected. More than you realize. David stared at him, the weight of it all beginning to settle in. Nothing made sense. And yet, somehow, it all did. Secrets. Disappearances. New identities. Someone had been pulling strings from behind the curtain for years, and now the threads were snapping loose. As they sped through the city streets, David's phone buzzed. It was a message from Emily. "Dad, where are you?" "Mom's gone. She left a note." His heart dropped. Carl glanced at him. "It's starting." The night was far from over. And what waited at the end of it wasn't just the truth. It was a reckoning. One that none of them were prepared for. David's hands tightened around the steering wheel as Carl guided him through a maze of side streets. The city outside the windshield was silent, but inside the truck, everything felt like it was crashing down. Helen had left. Emily was scared. And the woman Marcus was protecting. Somehow, it was all connected. David didn't understand how, not yet, but his instinct screamed that everything was coming to a head. They pulled up near an old building on 8th Street. Faint voices echoed from inside, one soft and trembling, the other steady and calm. Carl stepped out first, motioning for David to follow. As they approached the entrance, the front door burst open and Marcus appeared, gripping the arm of the pregnant woman, trying to lead her out fast. Carl stopped in his tracks. "Lena," he said in a shocked whisper. The woman froze. Her eyes met Carl's, and in that moment, David saw something flash between them. Recognition. Fear. Regret. "You know her?" Marcus asked, confused. Carl nodded slowly. That's Helen's sister." David blinked. "What?" Lena, if that was her name, spoke softly. "I haven't seen Helen in 20 years. David stepped forward, his voice cracking. "Why didn't she ever tell me about you?" Lena lowered her head. "Because she thought I was dead." The words hit like a wave. Carl finally spoke, voice steady. They were both in the same group home. Both tried to run. But only Helen got out. Lena was caught, taken back, forced into silence. Until she disappeared for good. Helen thought she didn't survive. Marcus looked from one face to another, trying to catch up. "So all this time, you've both been running from the same man?" Lena nodded. "He goes by different names now. But yes. He found me a few months ago. I barely escaped. I was hiding until the baby comes. I didn't know what else to do." David stepped back, overwhelmed. "Why now? Why bring all this back after so many years?" Lena looked up, eyes raw. "Because he never stopped looking for Helen. And I think is closer than she realizes." Just then, headlights flashed through the alley. A dark SUV turned the corner, slowing as it approached the building. Everyone froze. Carl pulled Lena and Marcus back inside. "We don't have time," he said. "There's a back exit. Go. Now." David followed, mind spinning, heart pounding. In the back of the building, they found the exit leading into a narrow passageway. Lena gripped Marcus's hand tightly, while Carl dialed someone on his phone, someone who seemed to know the plan, who could help them disappear again. As they moved toward safety, David felt a strange calm settle over him. Everything Helen had hidden now made sense. The years of looking over her shoulder, the quiet anxiety she never spoke about, the way she flinched at certain sounds or names on the news. She wasn't lying to hurt him. She was lying to protect them both. But just when the tension seemed to ease, just when they stepped out into the open air, a single voice called out from behind them. "David." They all turned. Helen stood there, pale, exhausted, soaked from rain. She must have followed them, must have known deep down where this would all lead. Her eyes locked onto Lena's. The sisters stood frozen for a beat, 20 years of silence between them. "I thought you were gone," Helen whispered, voice cracking. "So did I," Lena replied. And just when it felt like there might be peace, just when the moment finally opened up for healing, a sharp sound cut through the night. A single gunshot. Everyone dropped instinctively. Screams echoed. Marcus shielded Lena. David spun, trying to spot the source, heart thudding like a drum. But there was no second shot. No movement. Silence. Then Carl stood up slowly, pulling a small pistol from his coat. "It's okay," he said. "He's gone." David looked at him, shocked. "What do you mean?" Carl nodded toward the alley. "He followed me here. The man who hunted them both. I've been tracking him for years. Tonight, I made sure he came to the wrong place at the wrong time." David didn't know what to feel: relief, grief, confusion. Everything had changed in a matter of minutes. Later, police would confirm it. The man they found in the alley had a long history of false identities and sealed records. He was wanted in multiple states. And now, his trail of destruction was finally over. Lena was taken to a safe house. Marcus stayed with her. Emily came to visit the next day, holding her mother's hand as Helen shared the truth, piece by piece. But the final twist came days later, when David received a small envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a note in careful handwriting. "You were never supposed to know. But thank you for not letting the past destroy us. H." Underneath the note, folded neatly, was a faded photograph. Two children, sitting on a front step. Smiling, arms around each other. On the back, it simply read, "Helen and Lena. Home, once." David stared at the picture for a long time. Because in the end, the story hadn't just been about lies or betrayal. It had been about survival. And sometimes, love survives too, even when the truth nearly tears it apart. The days that followed were quiet, but heavy. David found himself walking through the house in long silences, hearing echoes of conversations that had once seemed ordinary. Now, everything carried new weight. The coffee mug Helen used every morning. The small blanket she always wrapped around herself on cold nights. The corner of the living room where they'd hung pictures of family vacations, birthdays, forgotten moments captured forever. None of it had changed. And yet, everything had. Helen stayed at her sister Lena's temporary shelter for the first few days. David respected the space she needed, but he visited when she allowed it. Their talks were slow, careful. It was like rebuilding a bridge that had burned halfway across. They both stood on their own sides, unsure if the other was strong enough to step forward. One afternoon, Emily sat beside her father in the backyard. The autumn air was crisp, and the trees around them glowed with orange and red leaves. She looked older now. Not because of time, but because of understanding. She'd read the note her mother left. She knew about the past, the secrets, the fear Helen had lived with. At first, Emily didn't know how to feel. But her love for her mom didn't disappear, it just changed shape. She did what she had to do, Emily said, softly. She was scared, Dad. But she gave us a good life. David nodded. Yeah, she did. Emily leaned her head against his shoulder. You still love her, don't you? He didn't answer right away. His eyes stared out into the rustling trees, remembering the early years. How Helen laughed. How she cared for him. How she'd held his hand at his mother's funeral. That love, though now complicated, had been real. Yes, he finally said. I do. Meanwhile, Marcus was learning how much one decision could change a life. When he gave up his seat to that pregnant woman on the bus weeks ago, he had no idea it would lead him into a hidden world, one of danger, courage, and connection. He kept in touch with Lena, even after she was moved to a permanent safe location through a victim protection program. She gave birth to a healthy baby boy in a secure hospital wing. She named him Hope. I named him after the one thing I refused to let go of, she told Marcus, her voice breaking with joy. Marcus began volunteering at a local shelter that helped women in similar situations. His story was passed around quietly among staff about the teenager who made a small kind decision and ended up saving a life. More than one, really. As for Carl, he disappeared as quietly as he had appeared. But David received one final text from him. She's safe now. And you gave her something no one else ever could, peace. Take care of her. Life didn't snap back to normal. It reshaped itself. Slowly. Helen returned home 2 weeks later. Not because everything was fixed, but because she wanted to start over with honesty. She sat across from David at the kitchen table the first night back. The space between them was full of unsaid things. "I should have told you," she said quietly. "Not just for your sake. But for mine too." David looked at her with soft eyes. "You survived something terrible. And then you built a life around that survival. That takes strength most people don't understand." She smiled faintly. "Do you still see me the same?" He reached across the table, gently taking her hand. "I see you more clearly now. And I still see the woman I married." There were still things to work through, questions about trust, healing, and how to move forward. But they weren't afraid of those questions anymore. Because now, they were facing them together. Word quietly spread in the neighborhood, as it always does. Whispers behind curtains. Small glances in the grocery store. But no one ever asked Helen directly. Maybe because they sensed the truth didn't need to be explained. Or maybe because they finally saw the woman behind the story and she was no longer a mystery. One evening, David opened a small wooden box Helen had kept locked in the closet for years. Inside were photographs, letters, a few keepsakes from her past. Among them was a picture of her and Lena, children holding hands in the grass, eyes bright with a hope that life hadn't yet tried to take from them. He placed the photo on the fireplace mantel. It became a quiet symbol not of what had been hidden, but of what had endured. Months passed. Emily left for college, strong and independent. Marcus started a community podcast, telling stories of real people with hidden struggles, focusing on resilience, kindness, and truth. His first episode was about Lena's journey, recorded anonymously with her permission. It went viral. People began sharing their own experiences. Survivors, helpers, even strangers who once felt invisible. The note the pregnant woman gave Marcus on the bus remained tucked in his wallet. Faded, but sacred. He read it often, not just to remember the moment, but to remind himself how powerful one small act of kindness can be. "You changed my life with one seat. Someday, I hope to return that kindness to someone else." The story became more than just a twist-filled tale. It became a reminder that people are layered. That sometimes, we protect each other through silence. That love can survive secrets, and forgiveness can rise from ashes. Helen never tried to hide again. She became an advocate, speaking quietly at local support groups, sharing her experience when it could help someone else feel less alone. She didn't lead with her past, but she no longer ran from it either. And David, he wrote. At first just for himself, then eventually as a way to help others understand how to live through betrayal and come out stronger. His blog gathered quiet readers, people searching for healing. He never sensationalized their story. He shared the human part. The messy part. The love. The truth, in the end, had shattered everything. But from that, something honest had been built. In the final chapter of it all, the family stood together for a photo in their backyard. Helen, David, Emily home for the weekend, and baby Hope nestled in Lena's arms. They laughed as Marcus set the camera timer and ran to join them, standing beside the woman who reminded him why life is worth fighting for. As the shutter clicked, freezing that moment in time, no one was thinking about secrets or headlines or pain. They were thinking about now. About healing. About what it means to stand in the light after years spent in the shadows. And that was the story the world would never forget. Not because of its shock, or its twists, or the rumors. But because it reminded everyone watching that behind every story is a person. And behind every person, there is a truth waiting patiently to be seen. The end.